Benjamin Keep is a learning scientist with his PhD from Stanford University. He also runs a successful YouTube channel that goes in depth about the science behind learning. He has a learning community that I am a part of, and I strongly recommend it because it has courses that go over the fundamentals of learning sciences and how to apply those. Thank you, Benjamin, for doing this interview. I think it's going to be a really big help for people who are preparing for the MCAT, and I hope a lot of people who are watching go and check out your YouTube channel because of how much helpful information is on that. And what I would like to do with this interview is go over the steps of MCAT preparation and get your thoughts on each one, starting with reading and then notes, followed by recall, and finally practice questions.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate, obviously, if people want to check out my channel, it's great. It's good to have them around. Yeah, I'm very happy to be here.
Okay, so for reading, this is probably going to sound like really basic, but what are the objectives when you are reading through a textbook? Because I think a lot of people have different ideas of, am I supposed to come away with a perfect understanding, or am I supposed to have this totally memorized? What should they be trying to do with just the reading part of learning?
I mean, I think it depends a little bit on the subject matter. So I'm all of my answers here, I think, will be inflected toward the MCAT, or what I believe the MCAT to be about, based on seeing some practice questions and these things in some of your videos. So that's some of my answers might otherwise depend, but I'm going to be thinking in terms of like STEM and like test preparation. I was reading actually a research paper that put it fairly decently, I think, which is one of the goals when reading or watching a video or whatever is to pick out what parts or what pieces of understanding that you want to permanently change what's in your long-term memory. Like, you want to permanently change how you think about something. And so you're not there to memorize everything. You're not there to understand everything perfectly, certainly not the first time around. You're there to find what's interesting and relevant to help you develop your understanding. And an analogy maybe that might be helpful is that reading in the sports context, if you were to say a coach was demonstrating how to hit a forehand or hit a volley in tennis, or a basketball coach was showing you how to shoot a certain kind of shot, right? Like, the reading is there to give you a conceptual understanding of what this is about, right? And to pick up a few things so that when you go to actually, hit the forehand or the volley or shoot the basketball, that you will have it, you're pointed at least in the right direction, right? You don't know, it's not like you don't know anything. You have at least some sense of what's going on. Oftentimes I think it's helpful for reading, when we're thinking about reading, is to kind of like, this is the scaffold that's going to take us to the next step, that's going to let us practice meaningfully, right? If you had never seen anyone play tennis, but you just knew the rules, like, that would be less helpful than if you had watched someone, and maybe even watched someone point out, like, oh, pay attention to this part, pay attention to that part, like, look at what they're doing here. And so that's where I see the role of reading, in like the test prep process. I also think that there's often the ideas that you are trying to convey, if you are an author of a book, are different than what the student is thinking, right? I mean, that's kind of the whole point. The student doesn't understand what the teacher understands. But it's not just a question of an information issue. It's not like, hey, I have all of Wikipedia stored in my head and you don't. Okay, so I'm just going to like repeat articles to you or kind of read through sentences and you're supposed to capture that. Really, in many, many cases, it's about grasping the conceptual difference between what you understand about a situation, what the expert or the teacher understands about a situation. Sometimes you don't have any idea whatsoever, so you're just kind of like, sure, that sounds fine. But as your understanding develops, you want to be like refining that understanding, and so it's like they're describing. I don't know what's a good a good analogy here. I don't know, maybe like Minecraft or something. If there's a new kind of element in Minecraft or a new thing that you can build, like they're describing something that you haven't seen before yet. And so part of the goal of reading is to kind of like start to overcome that gap in understanding.
A lot of people, I think, for the MCAT, they want to get like perfect before they go to practice questions, and I'll ask more questions about this when we talk more about practice questions, but they don't need to be perfect before practice questions, because practice questions are going to play a huge role in enhancing that knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, the expectation that you are going to kind of be, storing this information that you're reading about and understanding it perfectly, especially the first read through, is not right. And it's also like, if you delay practicing problems, and I see this mostly again in the STEM disciplines where, it's very problem focused. Like the main skill that you're trying to get better at is to get better at solving problems. If you're not getting better at solving problems, you're not getting better. Like that's it. You can understand everything well, but if you can't actually solve the problems, you actually don't understand. And so it's often very helpful to package the reading and the problem solving in sequence or together. So you read a little bit, you solve some problems, you read some more, you solve some more problems, because and often I feel like going back to reread what you initially read after seeing some problems can be quite helpful, because then you're like, oh wait, I didn't think this was important, but now I see this little detail, it's come up like 3 times in the problems that I've been working on already. And so, or I mean, you can also tackle the problems first and then read, too. I mean, if you have enough background knowledge to make progress on the problems at least. But I don't really think that delaying problem solving is a good idea.
Yeah, I think a lot of MCAT preppers get very frustrated when they jump to problems and they're not doing well. And for a lot of people that I work with, it's kind of you want to do somewhat well, but you also have to treat this as part of learning. And that's going to change how you understand it. And then what I tell them is the second set, that's the one that we're more focused on, is if you start with a 60%, can we see a 75 on the next one? And that's, to me, when I work with people, that's like the best sign, is to see that improvement. Do you feel any different about that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, no, I guess I don't. I don't feel any different. I'm in agreement that especially early on in the problem solving process, and like, you've got to give yourself some credit. I mean, I think people they get confused and they have a mismatched expectation of what's going on when they do certain studying activities. And so, I mean, again, just to go back to the sports analogy, like if all you did was watch tennis and then you went to go play tennis, do you think you would be able to like play a great game, like the first time out? No, of course not. Of course not. That would be crazy. And people should think the same exact way when, tackling math problems, chemistry problems, physics problems, all of these things. Like, solving a problem is hard. Like you have to interpret the problem. I mean, I've read some of these MCAT passages, of which I have very little background knowledge to be able to read them. But it's like, this is not a joke. These are dense passages. There's nuances to them, and so the first time that you're not used to kind of the way that questions are framed or asked. So there's really there's a lot to learn in that first pass when you first start tackling problems. And then, as you go on, various kinds of experience help you in the next rounds. If you say focused on I don't know, biochem or something, first, and then you were able to, you got some experience solving those problems. Well, then problems in some of the other disciplines that the MCAT test maybe wouldn't be, you'd be familiar with a format. You'd be a little bit, your expectations would be shaped a little bit, even if you hadn't yet like focused in on that other discipline or that other sub-discipline. But as you gain experience solving problems, yeah, you would, if you're not improving, then you start to worry.
Back to just the reading portion of it. What are some things people can do? Because you talked about, we have someone goes in with their understanding of a concept, which is going to be lower than the expert that wrote the material. And I've heard you talk in some other videos about trying to make sure you're understanding what the writer wants you to understand. Are there any techniques or strategies people can do to check themselves and make sure, am I getting what the author wants me to take away from this?
I think part of this comes from experience, from reading technical and like dense material, and part of it is getting those early problem solving experiences in too, right? If you read something and then you go to solve some problems and something's not working, you didn't understand something, well, then that's a sign that you didn't understand what happened. And so you can go back to the reading again and refine your understanding. And so it shouldn't be the case that you just refine your understanding of the concept that you just read. It should be the case that you also refine your skill on a certain level at understanding new concepts itself. So like your skill maybe in understanding the style that the writer is using, or like, indicators that certain aspects of this are more important than others, or this kind of thing. I think, a very easy way to do it is to just try to recapitulate what the author is saying. If you can see the structure of the argument or the explanation, especially if you can state it in different, if you're just copying the words that they say, it's that's not any indication of real understanding. But if you can say it in a different way, if you can explain it to yourself or to others, if you can apply it to examples, then these are all signs that you have gotten something. You may not have the whole thing, but you've gotten something important from it. And I think, all of us can still be surprised. That's the part of the fun of reading, is that, it's like, oh, hey, different disciplines focus on different kinds of evidence and different experiments, and there's different elements that they're focused on. So it's not like we would never be surprised, or anything. But yeah, just as you're reading, you should be kind of monitoring your understanding, so that if someone says something that doesn't make sense, you need to be like, that doesn't make sense. And it doesn't, in the same way that like a computer, this is a little bit of an exaggeration, but if you write a computer program and there's some error that comes up, something's wrong with the program, right? It's not wrong with you necessarily, and it's your model of the program that is incorrect, right? Because you're expecting something to happen that isn't happening. In the same way, when you're reading, when you come across something that is like, wait, that doesn't make any sense, or that seems inconsistent with this, maybe the person's wrong. But in our context, when we're reading a textbook, probably your understanding is wrong. And so it's like, then you need to backtrack and be like, okay, well, where did I go wrong? What piece of my understanding is wrong? And so then it's kind of more an investigation of, okay, like, here I know I got this part right. Like, okay, but then what's the step from step 1 to step 2? Okay, am I clear with that? And so then you kind of need to be a little bit more thorough in trying to figure out, where does the difference lie?
Something that I tell people, and tell me if this sounds like similar to what you're saying, is to read the passages or even like a textbook or whatever, with the mindset that you're fact checking it. And you're almost going in with the mindset of, I'm going to see if you're wrong. I know you're not wrong because this is the official MCAT, but I'm going to go in with the mindset that I'm looking for errors. And I tell them that if you find an error, you either misread something or you have a misunderstanding. So is that along the same lines?
Yeah, I mean, I think like, and this is really just good advice generally of being a, I don't want to say like a skeptical reader necessarily, but there's a part of this that involves skepticism that is kind of like, no, I want you to prove it to me. I want you to show me, like, and as you're reading and as you're kind of thinking about the statements that are being made, right? And you can think of it almost, I mean, if some of your viewers are like math people, you know, like every step of the proof has to work, right? And it has to make sense from one step to the next. And so, you know, when you, you know, you're kind of looking for those gaps, and there's almost no way that we can completely specify everything in these textbooks. I mean, they specify a lot. They do give a lot of details and examples often, but you know, they're still working under the assumptions. I mean, they have a model of what you know, right? And so, and their model of what you know might not be accurate. And so there's almost always gaps to fill. And so that's, I mean, I think that's where this kind of like, this more like thinking in terms of a detective, thinking in terms of, investigating, you know, what's going on. And kind of, it is surprising how often mistakes do make it into published books. I think, you know, like there are dates that are wrong that I found. There are, you know, like, so actually if you're noticing, and usually they don't like impact the, you know, the main point that they're trying to say. But if you find yourself finding these little things, it's like, I actually think that's wrong. And then you look it up or something and you find, oh, like I did find a typo or a whatever. I mean, it's not like looking for typos is really what you want to do, but as a, you know, as a possible diagnostic signal, it's like, oh, well, you're probably reading fairly closely if you're picking up some of these details.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite text or messages to get from people I'm working with is, I think I found a mistake in your notes. And sometimes it's like, oh man, that's a mistake. Other times it's like, no, you know, this works this way or whatever. But regardless, it's like you were thinking, you were really engaged with it. And that's why you either found one or at least thought you found one.
For sure.
So I think when most people hear the word notes, at least in the MCAT space, they are thinking, they're looking at information and they're writing it down word for word or close to word for word. I think at most maybe some paraphrasing. When you use the word notes, what all does that mean to you?
I mean, I do think there is going to be some repetition of content because, you know, your notes are drawing on a certain source. But yeah, in general, I'm not really interested in rewriting what is already there. And some people, I think students in school sometimes get this impression that it's like that's what notes are about, and then some of them are like, okay, that's what notes are about, I'm going to rewrite it. And then some of them are like, oh, this is useless, why would I do this, why would I just repeat content again? When I think about notes, I think about grappling with my understanding of the material, right? Usually it's not enough just to kind of read the book and think in your head, and it's not so much that, you know, you have to take notes all the time, or notes are so critical or important. It's just a nice tool to help you think. I think that's kind of how I view them, as a way of helping you to engage in the material, and not in the sense of like, oh, this is going to help me pay attention, and if I don't take notes, I'm like, my mind will wander. But really as a way of like, you know, am I understanding what's happening? Am I understanding what's going on? And often if you continue to kind of take notes over the course of, you know, reading multiple sections and incorporate the stuff that you already know, you know, I mean, you might be linking examples from, you know, a chemistry class that you had 2 years ago or something, or a physics class or whatever. You might be linking these examples to the notes that you're taking now. that's not in the material. That's not in the book, right? This is kind of your personal kind of thinking garden that is growing over time. And sometimes, I mean, a lot of times for me, like, I don't really keep notes. Sometimes I think it is more helpful to keep notes over time and see that knowledge base grow, and you know, you can look things up and everything. But yeah, fundamentally, I view them just as like a tool for thinking with.
So if you are in the middle of taking notes and you look at what you've written, and I'm guessing we can just go ahead and say, like, if it's word for word what was already written, that's pretty blanket statement, not good notes. Is that fair to say?
I mean, I think they're. I mean, yeah. I mean, I'm someone that isn't a fan of blanket statements, I guess. But there are cases where I think, okay, this is an important quote, or this is an important definition of which, like, every word is critical and well chosen, and it must be this way because of XYZ thing. I do think there are some times when it's like, hey, I'm just trying to kind of, let's just run through this again in my head, you know, like, and maybe it is exactly the same words, but I think those cases are relatively rare. I think the general case is that if you are just repeating what you have read or heard, then you're kind of, that's a sign that you're not really thinking about it, because I mean, it's not guaranteed that you're not. It's just, it's very easy to get in the mode where you're just transcribing what's being said, and especially when someone's like, "Oh, this is important." Blah 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 is, you know, this is a definition for whatever. Oh, okay. Oh, the such and such process. Okay, I'll write down whatever it says. But if what you know, if say there's a description of a certain process and you draw that process out in a flowchart in your notes, like, that's indicative of somewhat of an engagement in your thinking. If you add to the examples that are given, even, you know, even something as simple as, like, here's X principle and here's some examples of this principle, and then in your notes, if that structure, that basic structure, it might not be exactly the same words. It shouldn't be the exact same words, but it's like, hey, this is the basic idea, and then these are a couple of memorable examples that illustrate that idea. Like, if you have the structure of what kind of what's been presented to you, I mean, I think that's an indication that you're capturing something.
The structure thing I've heard you talk about a few times, and I feel like I understand it, but I'm not 100% sure. When you talk about, like, extracting the structure out of information or content, for example, let's take something like chemistry. The periodic table is very built on this concept of valence electrons without getting into it. So when you talk about structure, are you talking about noticing things like that the periodic table organization is in a way a subsection of this broader topic of valence electrons and electron orbitals? Is that the type of structure that's in your mind when you mention that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've probably used it in a couple of different ways. You use the term structure in a couple of different ways. One way is like the understanding the structure of the material as it has been presented to you, in terms of, like, hey, this is principle 1, this is principle 2, these are examples, this is a procedure, this is a different procedure. And so seeing that, like, hey, these two concepts, they're not the same, they're different, right? Or these two, like, concepts are subcategories of a broader concept, right? Like, and all of that, I mean, usually textbooks or teachers are fairly explicit about that, but students don't always pick up on what they'll get confused about about kind of the overall, the way it's been organized in terms of how it's been presented. I mean, usually teachers and textbooks think a decent amount about how to organize it in a way that makes sense. That's one meaning of what I mean when I say structure. But the other thing, which might be closer to what you're talking about, I don't know, is like, as you are collecting concepts and procedures and examples and principles and various ideas and everything. And this includes when you're working on practice problems, right? You're trying to grow your own understanding of this area. And so, yeah, and this happens in little fits and starts and different steps where it's like you might have little insights here and there, or like realizations about, oh, this is actually connected to that, or like this is a completely different environment or a completely different topic, but actually it's the same process, the same basic, like, 4-step process here that's going on here, that's going on there. And so this is really about organizing what you're understanding in your head, and seeing patterns that maybe are not directly given to you, and maybe aren't even given to you at all. I mean, all of us are intelligent people. We can observe things and learn things on our own. And so, the process of having more general ideas of things, the process of having more elaborate ideas of understanding of things, more details, more exceptions, more boundary conditions, all of these, this is something that, it's a part of understanding things, and you want to be aiming to do that on your own, to becoming like an independent, learner and thinker in that way.
And would those be good things to be taking notes on, writing down, like realizations, restructuring information, relationships?
Yes, 100%. Yeah. I think that's most of the notes that I would take. I mean, I do think there's a little bit of like if you're taking notes in like a free recall kind of style, where some of that is just trying to like, okay, like what just happened, what was said, let's remember what I can from all that. But a lot of the notes are comments or connections or realizations, or even moments of surprise, like, whoa, this, like, I did not expect this. I kind of view, I guess, maybe this might be hard to do with some of the material on the MCAT, but in general, I view learning as a kind of emotionally engaged activity. And so sometimes my notes are really like, this is crazy, or like I can't believe they said this, or this doesn't make any sense. And maybe, a week later when I look back, I'm like, oh wait, it does make sense. That was me being, yep. Really out of line or whatever. But I find that to be a big part of the experience of learning.
Yeah, that's another text or message that I love getting, is when people are thinking about just regular life, and then they'll ask, how does X work? And it's maybe a microwave. How does a microwave work? And it's like, well, you are equipped with the knowledge to explain a microwave if you are studying for the MCAT. It is, I think people get way more excited about the MCAT once they realize that because it's basic sciences and it's covering so many of them, there are so many things you can explain using just MCAT knowledge. And like you said, it's very exciting for people who really, I think, get that's part of it.
I think in general, I'm sure there are things you can learn that maybe make you, don't make you feel empowered or anything. But I think, in general, this like learning most things is a feeling of freedom and independence, and of power a little bit, of like, yeah, look what I can do. It's almost like a kid, who just realized they could build some crazy tower or something. It's like, look what I can do now, and I lean into that feeling a little bit. I think it's great. When students realize how relevant certain things are to their daily lives, for sure. But really anything, like I've been doing some juggling practice, just like, let's get powerful at this, it's fun to kind of see that incremental growth over time.
Yeah. And I think there's oftentimes maybe a moment where people realize that they've improved, and you can really feel it from their energy that they now have this hope, basically, that they can actually get whatever score they're trying to get for, or just succeed with med school in general, which is that's one of the best things to see.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's almost this like, in the same way that there's kind of a like a positive feedback loop going in the negative direction. If like you're disappointed and things are confusing and you're kind of, you're kind of like trapped in your own head a little bit, and maybe you don't see what you need to improve or how to improve from where you're at. But then, I mean, like the place you really want to be is like the positive feedback loop in the positive direction, where you are like, yeah, like you're feeling great, you're feeling like you're improving, and that is what like drives you forward to push further, and it just goes and goes and goes until you feel like, wow, I really know a lot, and I can really do a lot now. And when you feel that way, it's cool, it's awesome.
Do you have any tips for the environment around you to facilitate active learning? That, because speaking of the feedback loop, I get the feeling that a lot of people get very discouraged when they put in a lot of time, they don't get better, and a lot of times the time they're putting in is very iffy in terms of if they're even giving themselves a chance to actively learn. And a really bad example would be like the TV is on. I think everyone knows not to do that. But just little small things like, I think people, timing, I think is a big one that I stress on for people, is to have a stopwatch going when you're studying. And that way these little distractions matter, because what I tell them is you have to stop the stopwatch if you do a small distraction. So any tips on just getting into a flow, if you will, of really studying to help people just get more engaged?
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably not the best person to ask, to be honest with you. I, you know, you can't see the rest of this room. I have a bunch of stuff on the floor. I have always been a kind of highly disorganized person, but it hasn't bothered me. Like I can still stay in a book for hours if if I'm into it. I think one thing, I mean, certainly, all the standard advice applies in terms of, putting your phone in a different room or turning it off, and kind of minimizing the opportunity for distractions and all that kind of thing. But in some sense, like, those tips are coming from almost like a like stop the bad things from happening kind of approach. And I think for me, a better, maybe not better, but a different complementary approach is to think, how do I keep good things going? And so, I think, like, I mean, I don't know if this is true of your students, but in my experience, students tend to be over ambitious in terms of like, hey, I'm gonna put 2 hours of studying in this afternoon. It's like, man, you're gonna be tired by the end of like an hour, and it's not even clear, like, are you actually working during that, or are you just like kind of putting in the time and poring over the pages? I mean, I remember seeing kids. This is like around like COVID times, but the coffee shops were still open, and it was like, they, like, high schoolers would be studying. I'm sure they would tell themselves that they studied for like 3 or 4 hours, but it's like half the time, they were talking to their friends or like asleep on their book or, whatever else. I think exactly what environments are conducive to like good studying is kind of person dependent a little bit. Sometimes I do really well in like a busy environment, and I really like being in like a coffee shop. Other times, like I kind of don't, I'll get distracted. Someone will be having a conversation. It'll be annoying to me and I won't be able to focus. But I mean, I think that the important part is to like recognize your options, that it's like, hey, I can structure the environment. I can decide how much time to spend on this. I can decide when I want to do for a break or when those breaks occur, and keep experimenting and find something that really works for you. And I mean, I think there are different kinds of, like, people try to lump everything together, even though there are different kinds of tasks and maybe different kinds of motivations or kind of motivational orientations that we might have for the task. Like when I am editing video and I'm just doing like the A-roll cut, so it's just the kind of my voice, my talking head. I can just do that like it's mindless. I know what my basic script is. I know when I've made a bunch of mistakes, I'm just moving very quickly. That's very different than like sitting down and trying to understand something new. If I know I'm going to be like practicing exercises on the piano or something, or a juggling pattern, it's like I have to be engaged, but that's a different kind of engagement than like than like, oh, like a creative problem solving kind of engagement, and so just, I think being a little open to trial and error, and trying not to be overly ambitious. It's much better to, have like 20 minutes of really like good thinking than it is to spend, 2 hours of just kind of sloppy thinking and not really paying attention or not really being focused. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's a little bit person dependent.
Yeah, to the point of the overly ambitious, I know when people try the stopwatch method and they're really strict, they stop it every time they're distracted. They might have a 5-hour window and they get in 1 hour of good studying. But then once they are able to get, let's say, 3 hours on the stopwatch, they're pretty amazed by how much they get done in 3 hours. And I always tell them, if you can get 3 hours in a 4-hour window, you're not going to have to study 8 hours a day. If you can just get focused, then the rest of your day can be free. Just don't do this kind of like the coffee shop approach where you're distracted for 75% of the time.
Yeah, I mean, there are times when I cannot believe how little time has passed. Whether it's like practicing a sport or playing, playing music or reading, it's like you will read the most fascinating passage in, over the course of like 5 to 10 pages. And then you'll look up and it's like, wait, only like 15 minutes or 20 minutes have passed. Like, I could swear I was here for like an hour, but when you're really into it, it's, it is amazing how much you can get done in a short amount of time.
Yeah. That's like one of my favorite experiences, again, to see people have, is where they're like, well, I can get a lot done in a short amount of time if I just focus. So if you are doing back to the notes thing, if you are taking notes, is it good to just write down, but good to write down the realizations, structure, organization, and then generally stay away from writing down every single thing you read? If you're taking that approach, I think one fear that some students have is that they want to have notes to reference back to. They want to look back and they want to have all the information right there. What I tell people who want to do that is, for one, with the MCAT, there's so much content, you just can't take notes on that much. And also just go back to the textbook. If you're writing something down so close to the textbook, is it okay to just say, don't write it down, go reference the textbook?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in general, again, there are contexts in which I think probably taking extremely thorough notes is good as a future reference point. But when you have all the material easily accessible to you, and especially like these days, you can just search something up, or you can do like keyword searches on PDF documents or whatever. I mean, if you have an electronic textbook, like, I just don't think it's a good use of your time to be rewriting all of that stuff. I mean, if you're rewriting and transforming it and also maybe using it as a reference later, that's one thing. But I think, one thing that I think students have to recognize is that not, in a given a given set of paragraphs or sentences, like a decent amount of that is actually a trying to explain what, say, one sentence means, or a couple of sentences mean, or an equation, or a graph, or whatever. And so, really, like the content of the book. I mean, if you understood things exactly how an expert understood them, they wouldn't have to explain all this. They could say a single sentence and communicate exactly what they're trying to communicate. But because they can't do that, there's a lot of words that are being spilled to just try to explain one concept. And so your goal is not really to like have all those words at your disposal again. The goal is to just be able to pull up that concept when you need it, and have that concept be kind of connected to other things, and have it be around when it's relevant. But yeah, that's what, I mean, it makes me concerned, I think, when you try to write all this stuff down, when a decent chunk of it is actually just to kind of get you to understand like the first sentence, or whatever.
Would it be appropriate to just like you don't like blanket statements? So I'm trying to think of a different way to. Would it be appropriate to tell people that if you that reteaching a topic is a good metric, and if you can't do it, there might be an issue there? Is that generally true?
Yeah. I would say
Okay.
that's a pretty yeah.
Okay, that one's a
I
fair
will
blanket.
endorse that as a blanket statement. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are other ways of testing yourself. I mean, basically, we're talking about a little kind of test to verify whether or not you understand something, or to kind of see. I mean, not just verify what you're understanding, but I mean, this is the thing too, where it's like, it's not like, oh, I couldn't teach it well. Oh, it's terrible. I don't understand anything. Right? The point of a lot of these self-monitoring processes are to identify what you don't understand and improve what you don't understand. So it's kind of like looking at like the quantity, in the same way that if you get a test back, it's, students are very interested, I mean, in kind of high school and college, about what their grade is. But it's like that's the least important part. The most important part is like, which kinds of problems did you get wrong and which did you get right? And that tells you what you need to work on. And so it's really the quality of your teaching. Yeah, I mean, in the sense of like is it thorough and enough? That is important. I mean, I think there is a little bit of a, I do think there are things that teachers care about that maybe we don't have to care about as much, when we are, doing this exercise, where it's like, okay, I really want like a clear presentation, and I would want to like pair images and words together, and I would want to, understand what the audience expectations are for teaching this stuff. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that, that's not as critical. But certainly thinking about, hey, someone who doesn't know about this topic, and how would I explain it to them in a way that would be easy to understand, or at least easy-ish. And a lot of times, I mean, this generates beneficial processes, because you have to think about, well, what's an analogy to this that they would understand, right? Or what's an example that they would understand? Like, what's a day-to-day example that we could turn to? And often those are going to be different than maybe the examples that you see in your textbook, or like, oh, there's some research study that did this experiment, but it's like, you can't explain that experiment because that's even more complicated.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of like in some of the big name textbooks, they'll be explaining like the experiments that led to this discovery of the atom. And it's like, why is this in this book? We do not need this information. But I know when I made notes that I made for some of the sections on the MCAT, I learned there was so much stuff that while I was writing it, I would fact check things that I was like, I'm not 100% sure on that. And then I'd read it and I'd like have to ask myself, where did I even get what I was previously thinking? I like just made stuff up in my head that I believed for months before having to write it and fact check. And same with creating my own organization to the material. That was very helpful for finding a bunch of different relationships and just thinking, is it appropriate to put this information in this section, or should it go more in this section? And that was, writing those notes was a huge boost to just how well I understood information.
I mean, yeah, I think, I mean, this kind of goes back to, yeah, like it's the quality of what's happening that is important. And I think there are, yeah, so many times when I mean, the vast majority of our knowledge is not like I know absolutely nothing or I have perfect, like, complete understanding of this thing. It's somewhere in between often, and so yeah, when you find those things, it's like, whoa, wait, where did I come up with this? I don't even know why I think this, but I don't know. Somehow I got it. That, I mean, that's something where we think we know something, but that's just not true. Or portions where it's like, I just kind of, that's all just fuzzy to me. It kind of works like this. We're gonna move on. And so that area is an area that could use more precision and more definition. And so really it's about exploring our own knowledge. The note-taking process is about grappling with what we're learning and exploring our own knowledge and developing that over time.
Where do notes and recall blend in terms of when you're making notes, how much should be referencing, looking at things, how much should be trying to think of it without referencing? Is there a time for one and a time for other? Kind of where do these merge?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a big fan of just like never taking notes with the reference nearby, and then later on referencing things. But to be honest, I mean, I also, when I'm reading, especially like reading a technical document, I mean, I'll take notes, just like the kinds of notes that I was talking about earlier, like this is crazy, how can they say this, or like, whoa, this is a really clever research design, or like verify, like kind of like, wait, so they actually did it like this, so they did it like X, Y, and Z way, which is totally different than this other person who did it Z, Y, X way. So I do think just almost naturally as we're reading, taking notes, notes in the margins, or like writing, you highlight and then on the PDFs make a little comment or whatever. I mean, I think that is often helpful for kind of meta commentary on what you're reading. But then I think for the kind of organization and for the benefit of memory and understanding, it can be very good to do free recall just after the fact, at some point afterwards. And then I think that's generally speaking a little more powerful, and it also it lets you glimpse what's happening after you read, which is you're going to forget some stuff, or things are like you'll realize that things don't make as much sense when you're trying to explain them to yourself and remember what happened as when you're actually reading that content. I mean, people get tripped up a lot, I think, when they're reading, where it's just like, yeah, that makes sense. Yes, of course, that's the next step. Of course. But then when they actually try to say, like, remember a procedure, then it doesn't make sense. It doesn't flow in the way that they want it to flow. And so getting that information, I think, is quite important. So it's not like I would never write, things when you're reading, but just like my primary note taking is afterwards. Yeah.
Okay, so with free recall, I think a lot of students get frustrated. Like if they're trying to do this style of writing out their thoughts without referencing anything or creating this structure, and they're not referencing the notes, I hear a lot of times they get frustrated at the level of difficulty. So, and I have kind of thought maybe in three kind of directions with this. One, that's just good, and it means that you're doing something that's difficult rather than doing something that's easy, because generally the easy stuff, as I understand it, usually isn't the best for learning. So is it that, or is it something that they need to do this in smaller chunks, don't take on so much information when they try and do it, or is it a matter of repetition? They just need to do it more, and then it gets easier.
Yeah, I think all three of those are playing a role. I think, for some students, when they go to do it, they've never done something like it before. And so it's kind of shocking to them that like they're so used to, you know, a fill in the blank kind of style of review or kind of taking notes when the thing kind of repeating what's being said, or even pulling out, you know, bullet points, but you're always referencing. You're like, wait, what? Check. Okay. Oh, what is that again? You know, and they're always going back and forth. That yeah, it's kind of shocking to be like, wait, no, you just have to rely on your own mind. That's it. There's nothing else. I think, yes, often to your second point with the, like, sometimes it's too much to do all at once. So, you know, after, I guess, I was reading some textbooks recently just as kind of, I don't know, to get some practice in and to kind of see what I would kind of naturally tend to do. And I, you know, like, roughly speaking, I would read, you know, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 pages of a textbook. And then like, okay, that's enough for now. Like, let's, you know, and I might take, I don't know, maybe, I took the notes on slides, so maybe like a couple of slides worth of notes. I'm just jotting quick things down, or maybe, yeah, important points, or, reflections on it. Yeah, if it seems too hard, you can always do less. You could do a smaller chunk and see if that's helpful. Obviously, this is just like any skill. This is something that will get easier the more you do it. I also, I don't know if your students experience this, but there's also, I suspect, a little bit of an emotional component. So if you're the kind of person that wants to get everything right all the time and wants to like remember all the details, then it seems like when you do this, it's like, wow, like I'm not doing a good job because I've forgotten X, Y, and Z thing. And so, and then that causes kind of anxiety, or I guess the anxiety is driving this, and then, you know, it kind of furthers this feeling like, you know, I didn't pay attention enough, or I didn't, you know, and I guess I think it does take a little bit of a like calmer attitude about these things. About, it's like, okay, this is my first pass through this thing. Like we talked about earlier, we're not going to get everything the first go around, or maybe even the second or the third. Like, we're just getting what we can. And if we think of ourselves more as explorers, then I think that it's a little bit easier to take, of like, you're going through this completely new world and you're picking up what you can from it and observing what you can from it. And then, you know, as you map parts out, you'll take a different path through it, and you'll get even more from it. And so, yeah, I think as long as you don't, yeah, kind of like have these unrealistic expectations about it, I think it's usually useful.
Is there, when you're reading something complicated like chemistry or something, is there any benefit to kind of trying to go in chunks, so that way the first chunk you can really get down into some version of long-term memory, and then that way that information can be easier accessed while you read the next chunk that's going to build on the previous thing? To where, is there a limit basically when you're reading that you are piling in too much information that you don't even have the knowledge to work with some of the later information?
Yeah, I think this is something that, you know, different, you know, it's kind of a case-by-case basis as to, like, does this section vitally require you to understand this other section really well? In some cases, and in a lot of cases in science, I think the answer is yes. Yes, it does require you to understand this really well, because the next thing doesn't make any sense if you don't understand the previous thing. But there are also cases where it's like, hey, this is kind of a one-off topic, or this is a, you know, kind of a separate thing. I guess people have different tolerance levels for having a lack of understanding of something and still being okay. But yeah, there's a limit. I mean, and this is why I think preparation, say for the MCAT, is something that has to happen over a period of time. It's not like, hey, I have nothing going on for the next 2 weeks and I'm just gonna like cram all this stuff all together. It's like it takes time to like percolate and reflect on this, and connect things to the right other things, and to get to get the practice problems in and all that.
When you were mentioning I might have said that it takes too much time. People feel like it takes too much time to do this recall. And I had a question, and I'm not sure if you have necessarily research on this or just more of an opinion, but I kind of feel like it's not the time that's the issue, it's the focus. And it's really hard to stay focused and do that free recall. Feels like it takes forever, but that's really because you're focusing for 10, 15 minutes before feeling fatigued and taking those mini 2, 3, 5 minute breaks over the course of an hour. That's more like 30 minutes of breaks.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, I know, I mean, some people have, talked to me about the same thing, like, oh, it just seems like it would take forever, and some of these people haven't even actually tried it, but it's like, hey, if you just try it, like, yeah, just 10 minutes, and if you're worried about it taking too long, that's okay. Set up a stopwatch and stop at 10 minutes. Like, like, and that, even that is very helpful. You don't have to, it's not necessarily a thing that, you have to complete it perfectly for it to be useful. Yeah, I mean, I agree that I often, this is another case where it's like, I am surprised how little time has passed when I'm doing one of these kind of free recall note-taking sessions, which it might only last like 10 or 15 minutes. And then it's like, oh, wow, I covered a decent amount. So yeah, I'm not, I mean, I do think there are cases where it's like, okay, it's really painful to write it out. What if you're like really slow writer, or, you're a slow typist, and then that's a slightly different problem, because that's like, the translation from your mind coming up with ideas to actually writing it out is a painful process. So in that case, I can see, okay, that's going to be harder for you. In which case, I mean, you could do a transcription kind of thing, where, you have like the automated, speech to text software. I think a lot of times with all of these things, students want to give up their judgment and just like do what someone tells them to do. When it's like, no, all of these things, any advice that you get, you still have to use your own judgment and say, hey, how can I make this work for me, right? And kind of how can I figure it out, and experiment in a way that to test, like, is this going to be helpful for me? Is this the kind of situation that this advice applies to? All of these things.
When people do recall, a lot of times when I have a student who is feeling like it's taking a crazy amount of time, I'll ask them if we could just kind of walk through it together, and I can see what they're doing. And they're writing down a ton, basically every thought that they're having. So if they're reteaching a topic, let's say it's acids and bases, and they are drawing out a buffer, or not a buffer, sorry, they are drawing out a titration curve. They will write out their explanation of these, and I tell them, if you're explaining something, don't write out your words. Just explain it, draw your diagram, look at the points, explain the points, but don't write them out because of the time that it takes. So are we losing something by not writing it out when it's coming from recall, or is it negligible?
No, yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah. This is one of those things where in a lot of cases, especially if you're trying to reteach a concept or say a problem solving strategy or procedure or something, yeah, I mean, yeah, use your judgment about what makes sense to actually write out. And this is one of those, yeah, another case where it's like, if it seems like what you're writing isn't adding to what you already wrote before, or is kind of this like needless detail, then don't write it. Just, it's for you. The whole, every little learning technique or anything like this, these are all for you. And so, like if it's driving your learning forward, then that's really where you want to be. And to the degree that it's not, like, yeah, don't sweat it that much. I mean, I do think that the not the physical act of writing, but having an external image or an external a way of kind of seeing lots of things together in on a piece of paper or something. I do think that is quite helpful for making sense of things and thinking. And so, there's that part that's important. But yeah, if it's like, hey, I am transcribing every single word that pops up into my head, in the same way that you wouldn't do that if you were teaching someone, right? You would choose your words. You would probably be silent for a little while you thought of the next best thing to say. So yeah, another case where judgment is good.
So it's like, maybe not blanket statement, but keep the writing to, again, relationships, flowcharts, structure, organization.
Yeah.
Don't write a paragraph as you recall type of thing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and this is part of like the notes in general, where, I mean, if you were to read like an essay of mine that I wrote, it's obviously it's written. There are full sentences. There are, there's connecting clauses. There's, you're trying to kind of guide someone down a certain path. If you're just taking notes, and especially the notes that are for you ultimately, I'm using one word. I'm using 3 words. I'm, pointing a little arrow that goes here. There's all kinds of assumptions or kind of abbreviations that you might be using yourself to just kind of, what you're, if you can read it again, or if you know what you're writing, then that's enough. And so, yeah, I would say in general, like, being compact is facilitating those, like, the kind of organizational process that you want to be engaged in too. Because if you're rewriting everything super long again, it's like, well, can you actually say this whole thing in 2 sentences? Or does it take you 5 paragraphs, to explain something? Having the ability to explain at different levels of detail, I think is important. And especially if you can get back to this kind of high level concept that you understand really well, and that's, one equation, 1 sentence that you can explain really well when you need to, that's great.
I heard something in one of your videos that I thought was very just like simple to help with deciding what to write and to help with thinking, which was zoom in and zoom out, of look closer at the details and then see how it fits into all these other topics and into the bigger picture. And I think that, as far as being simple to apply, is something that everyone should just kind of always try to get themselves to start thinking about.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and you don't always have to do it at the same level of generality. Like if you did this chapter on acids and bases, last week or something, and you're just doing a little review to kind of, refresh your memory, it might only be a handful of things that you mention, or at a certain high level, you might not get into certain details. You might not draw the graph again, perfectly well, like it's something that it's okay. And the testing effect, research on the testing effect has often shown that, like, even just recalling parts of a general integrated topic that you understand or you have some understanding of is enough to facilitate your memory for all these related things to that topic, or to what you've remembered within that topic. So yeah, I mean, even just a little bit is helpful.
The biggest debate, probably maybe the biggest debate in the entire MCAT community, with recall and maybe out of all MCAT study techniques, is flashcards or no flashcards. So I think when most people think flashcards, they are more on the line of word definition. There's a word on one side, definition on the other. Some of the flashcards aren't that simple. There might be a little bit more, like weak acid, strong, base titration, and then maybe explain that. Can you just talk about, on one end, the word definition flashcards versus on the other end, free recall, basically?
Sure. I mean, I can give you my take on it. I mean, this is the kind of thing that, yeah, people feel strongly about, and it's not like there's abundant amounts of research on like, hey, we've studied flashcards extensively and X, Y, and Z things. They study things that are reasonably analogized to flashcards, and they study, free recall in a kind of controlled laboratory setting. There isn't, just crazy amounts of research on kind of this in applied test preparation contexts. With that being said, flashcards emphasize the relationship between, the front and the back of the flashcard. That's the whole point, is to kind of connect these two together and to kind of stick them to each other. And that's, it's good at what it does. Like it's good at what it's meant to do, which is to stick these two together. What free recall tends to emphasize is what in the literature they call target-target relationships. So if you this is maybe too simple of an example, but if it was like you had a definition of what a base is, and you had a definition of what an acid is, and you had a definition of what titration is, and or titration curve, or you have a definition of these different things. Flashcards can help you kind of stick those definitions to the words, but in terms of understanding acids and bases as they come up, as they are like a part of our lives and their effect on each other and their relationship to each other, like that's a much more free recall style thing or that's much more the kind of thing that you would get out of doing free recall, is to kind of connect the targets, connect the things that you're trying to understand to each other. And in general, like free recall is a stronger in the sense of stronger memories or stronger benefits to memory than flashcards. But both are active forms of recall. I can see using flashcards in various settings that would be helpful to do. I just think that often with this stuff, and the MCAT seems like a situation like this in particular, where flashcards, the underlying reason I think a lot of students use flashcards is because they're worried about remembering things. And the underlying reason for doing free recall is that you should be worried about understanding things. And so, like, especially with this kind of MCAT like material, the STEM material, like the free recall can help your memory of things too, but it's in my mind a much more of a technique that is focused on improving your understanding, whereas like flashcards are kind of like you already have to understand what's on the flashcards to do the flashcards. So like you've already gotten past the point of understanding in a way. You also might, like it doesn't have to be an either or kind of thing. You could use flashcards as a way of like getting some, okay, I'm going to, use flashcards for a few weeks to kind of like just get some basics down, get some basic understanding of what's going on, make sure I remember some of this stuff so that when I read, I get more out of the readings that I'm doing. And then as my understanding evolves, I maybe move over to free recall and kind of, and practice tests and practice questions. So it doesn't, I think, one of the traps that it seems like people who use flashcards or rely on them a lot fall into is that it's just like, okay, I've got my flashcards and that's all I'm doing forever. And, it's month 6 and I've got like 500,000 flashcards to go through, and it's just like, that's like doing well on your flashcards. That's not the point of what you're learning. It can be a tool in the toolbox, but you're much better off working on those practice questions, I think.
Yeah, I know there are quite a few people when they're studying for the MCAT. One of the first things they do is they figure out which pre-made flashcard deck am I going to use. And I don't know the exact numbers, but I don't think 3,000 is an unreasonable number of cards that are in those decks. And for some of the people that I've tutored, they will say they're spending 3 hours a day on flashcards. And to me, it is not useful to be memorizing all these definitions, because like what you saw with that practice passage, the MCAT questions are more like, they don't really ask what's the third step of glycolysis. Maybe a few of them do, but they're more like, if the liver has high rates of fatty acid oxidation, what hormone is most prevalent in the blood? Stuff like that. And you're not going to have a flashcard that has that on it. So very common for me to meet with people who have done tons of flashcards, but they're still struggling after mastering like a 3,000 card Anki deck. So yeah, my bias is so against flashcards, but yeah, just nice to see your perspective on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that I use very frequently, and I feel like whenever I've tried to use them, I'm just like, why am I doing this? I should just use free recall instead. Like even if it's words and definitions, like I'd almost rather just like, yeah, just sit down. What are the words I need to remember? This. What are the definitions? Okay, which definitions have I missed? Okay, like let me look back and understand those, more deeply. I do think, in certain contexts, it can be really helpful. Like if you just want to get a basic sense of like foreign language definition of a word, like ramp yourself up to be able to read or listen or speak a little bit more competently, and you kind of use them to complement and like ladder yourself up a little bit. I think that can be good. Like I said, I think they can be good like scaffolding. But yeah, the problem is, when all you're doing is the flashcards, then you've got serious issues.
Yeah, I like the approach of take something like glycolysis or the Krebs cycle. You have a bunch of enzymes, and maybe you use flashcards to memorize those enzymes, but then you're gonna have to use something like free recall to see how does the Krebs cycle fit into so many other pathways. And even kind of the zoom in, zoom out, or just be more active with the flashcards, because you'll notice, for instance, a structure changes from one step to the next, and the way it changes is very related to the name of the enzyme. It tells you this is a dehydrogenase, and you can really predict what's going to happen to the molecule. But if you're too focused on the card, I think you missed that.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, I think for the last phase, the practice questions. First thing, getting into maybe one of the other big debates in the MCAT community, the idea of doing a content phase with no practice questions and then following that up with a practice question phase. Some people do a slight blend where they do some practice questions with their content, but they still keep it mostly separated, and they definitely view it in two phases. And then my preference, what I recommend people do, is basically no phases. You want to be doing so many questions that you can't even distinguish between one phase and the other. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I was looking over your TikTok things, and one of them, I was actually telling my wife I really liked the title, which was like, the best time to do MCAT questions is all the time. And I think especially for these standardized tests, and MCAT is a very, at least in the US, I think it's a very hard test to take, just because of the level of content knowledge that you need and the complexity of the framing of the questions. And so much of the skill is in reading the question and interpreting it. And if the more practice that you can get at that, the better off I think you are. I mean, just like we were talking about earlier, where I don't think it makes much sense to hold off on these practice questions, because again, when you're reading, part of what you're reading, like part of what's important is what's relevant to you, and in this case the task is to do well on the MCAT, so it's what's relevant for tackling these questions. That's like, and when we talked about taking notes, right, if you take notes on something that is not going to be tested on, and like the experts don't consider to be terribly important, and is kind of not connected to other stuff that you're studying for, then that's okay. Like, you didn't need to take notes on that ultimately. I mean, we can't know what we are supposed to take notes on a priori, but like you can become more informed by doing more practice questions, because that's telling you. And the more that you understand the style of those, as you're reading more content, the more that you are picking up, like, oh wait, oh, I think this might be important. Oh, this had come up, the 3' and the 5' thing had come up in another section. Like I think this is going to be, and they're talking about it again here. Like, I think this is going to be important. So, yeah, I just think it's too critical to get early exposure early on. And I mean, sorry to just keep harping on the sports analogy, but like, yeah, are you going to sit and watch videos of tennis players explaining every aspect of tennis before you get started? No, like, you would actually, like, you would probably be better off spending more time practicing and less instructional time in some ways in like tennis. I know obviously there's lots of new concepts to learn in STEM fields, so it's not like, oh, just kind of swing it like this, and you don't have to learn that conceptual knowledge when you're training in tennis. But still, there's there's a lot to be said for just practicing the thing you want to get better at.
And a phrase I hear people say is, I want to have a mastery of the content before doing practice questions. And my rebuttal, and kind of what I feel like you're going to say, is practice questions are essential for mastering the content. There is no mastering it without practice questions.
Yep. I totally agree. And it's, I mean, this is the essential skill. I mean, we can do the free recall, we can teach it to someone else, we can do all these things. But when the rubber hits the road, it's like the essential skill is to solve questions on this test. And I mean, and these questions are created to probe your understanding. So wouldn't you want to use the best way of measuring, the best way of probing your understanding to know if you've mastered this or not? I mean, yeah, I have more to say, but yeah, that's the basic point. Is I 100% agree.
For people who are really concerned and they're like, I don't know anything about the content, how can I do practice questions? I think we're both saying it's not that you get zero exposure and jump right in necessarily. It's okay to read the chapter, do recall over it, and then do practice questions, but you're not waiting till you cover every single chapter in chemistry before you do questions. It's more questions after each topic. Is that a correct way to go about what you're saying?
I mean, I think it's possible to do practice questions first if you can make meaningful progress on those questions. But if you can't, if it's just like all gobbledygook and like you would basically just be guessing random things, I mean, then that's completely useless. And you shouldn't do that. And I think in most cases what you're describing is the right way to go about it, where it's like we gain a little content knowledge, we enough to be able to tackle some of these questions. We're not going to get all the questions right on the first try, obviously. We're going to be surprised. There's going to be little details that we didn't pick up on, and then we might go back to the reading or do more free recall or look at similar questions or whatever makes sense to do.
And is there any particular part that practice questions help more with, or is it more of, in general, they help with understanding, they help with having a better memorization of it? Is there any section of it that practice questions really hit on, or is it everything they kind of help with?
I think they just basically help with everything. I mean, you look at the research on the testing effects, on kind of the various ways that testing, and this is usually done through either multiple choice questions or open answer, kind of open short answer questions, or even just free recall at the extreme end. And it's just so helpful. It's really, really helpful for memory. It's really helpful for understanding because you get to see the context in which this material is coming up, and you can make, you start to get used to the way that questions are asked and kind of make predictions about what's going to be asked, even unconsciously. You kind of have certain expectations that will be shaped, and then knowing, I mean, I made a video about this a while ago, but it's like one of the major findings, right, is that, knowing how questions are going to be asked and what those questions might be like shapes your reading of the material. And so, if you were to think, if you were to think about it, like that time that you spend, if you were doing this large content block, before doing practice questions, and then you do a bunch of practice questions. But it's like, if what I just said is true, that doing the practice problems shapes how you read the material in the first place, then it's like all that time that you spend reading, you could have read it in a different way. You could have picked up different important stuff from that. You could have already been thinking about what, kind of what the questions might be like, even as I said, even unconsciously. And so, yeah, that's kind of like, it's not completely wasted time, but you could have been getting more value out of that reading earlier on.
So I think we've talked a lot about how practice questions improve the understanding of content, but reading the passage itself is also difficult, just as a reading comprehension standpoint in like skill. Is there a way to look at this in terms of improving that skill that people should be doing?
Improving, like reading the passages to begin with?
Reading the dense passage, yeah. Is it through deliberate practice and repetition? First, just that part. What's the mindset on the repetition and the skill building?
Yeah, this is where, well, I'll say something general and then I'll say something more specific. So, right, we've talked a little bit about different ways of monitoring our understanding and measuring things, right? Do we get, like, we see our results on practice problems, we see how well we can teach someone else to do something, we see how well we do on like a free recall kind of situation. If we're using flashcards, we see how well we do on flashcards. Each of these are kind of like imperfect measures, imperfect signals. They shed some light, some of them shed more light on our misunderstandings. And so here but we can also, be deceived, right? If things seem really fluid, if like everything's making sense while you're reading it, you can think that you have a better understanding than you actually do. And so this is one of those cases where sometimes I think getting, like, because ultimately people want to score well on the test, and scoring well on the test means getting the answers right. They want to jump ahead to getting the answers correct without kind of doing the legwork of understanding the passages well first. And so, if you get some answers correct, you kind of assume that you understood the passage, and maybe you did. But there also seem to be times when it's like, well, a single like they could be asking a bunch of different questions about a single passage, and if you're reading the passage correctly, I think if you're reading the passage well and deeply, then you would be prepared to answer dozens of different questions about it, right? And so it can't just be like, and you'd be able to answer any of these questions. And so I think the skill that you want to focus on is getting a really solid, like, situational understanding of the situation that the passage is describing. So exactly, I haven't read a ton of these passages, but say what experiment they're talking about, the various chemicals or enzymes involved, you get to see certain, like, as you do this more often, and this is true with any kind of standardized test, where you start seeing like, oh wait, like this is a thing that like immediately pops into my head about what could be a possible question based on this. I don't know that I'll get a question based on this, but like there might be something here with this part, there might be something here with that part. And so, as much as possible, just focusing on the question and trying to develop a really good understanding of that is maybe the skill that you want to get practice at, rather than say like, oh, I did well on this set of questions and then I did poorly on this set of questions. But it's like, well, you're not really reading the passages deeply to begin with, so your results are going to be pretty inconsistent.
And for building that skill, the way that I have always viewed it is when you do it timed, you're kind of performing. And then to build the skill is more going to be during review when it's untimed and you can really sit and think and focus. First off, if you have any comment on that, if that seems
I agree with you.
appropriate to say. Okay. And then when you are doing the untimed review, I think the hardest thing, maybe in the entire MCAT prep, is knowing if you're correct in your interpretation. And there's that expert feedback, getting expert feedback in that area, in my opinion, is the most important time for that expert feedback. But that's hard to do. If you don't have a tutor, you can't get just one-on-one expert feedback. Maybe you can get feedback from a friend who did pretty well. But any tips for someone who doesn't have access to either an expert or even a friend who did well, just has no access to people like that? How can they judge if they're doing it correctly?
Yeah, it's I think it's hard. I mean, unless you have prep materials that may go into like a particular passage, and like, okay, this is what we should be getting out of this passage, like it seems like that would be, and I don't know, maybe there are materials or books or resources online that do that, where it's kind of like it's less. I mean, they would still go over the questions and mistakes on the questions, but just reading the passage, what should we be taking away? What's important here? One thing that you could do is to kind of step through. So you read it, you try to analyze it as best you can, and then you go up again and kind of step through each sentence or each maybe like major word. It's like, okay, this one's important. Okay, did I cover this? Have I checked? Is that part of my understanding of what's going on here? Is this part of my understanding? So I make sure that I haven't skipped any element. I think another way that you can do it is kind of the revising or editing kind of approach, where it's like, hey, just come back to it tomorrow and look at it fresh and see if what if your understanding still makes sense to you then, or review the same thing. I mean, you could do it at two different times where you've forgotten really what you did it a week ago or something. It's a little bit familiar to you, but you may have forgotten exactly what you wrote down. And so now you do it again. Now you get two examples, of your two kind of snapshots of your analysis. I think, if the problems themselves or the questions themselves can be indicators of or can point you to areas that you don't understand well. It's like, you should be able to solve all the questions if you understand the passage well. So if you have problems with a question, then, and especially if you get it wrong, or even if you're just not confident, you might have gotten it right, but it doesn't make sense quite why you've got it right. That can be an indication and kind of show you what part of this is hazy or is missing for you. Yeah, those are the things that come to mind, at least right now.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're aware, but people with questions get very focused on, oh, I got 4 out of 5 right. And what I care about is, can you explain why you got them right? And then can you go through the wrong options and explain why those are wrong? And to me, that second part is something that a lot of people struggle with. And I think people forget on the real test, 2 answers could look good. It's not enough to just have one answer that looks good. You got to be able to disprove the other 3.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's good. It's a good practice. I mean, again, a lot of what we've been talking about, right? That what you would do in a practice test situation is different than what you would do on the actual test. So the actual test, you are going to be timed. the actual test, you might be doing like process of elimination strategies. You might not have time to like, you're not going to step there and be like, oh, well, this is wrong because of X, Y, and Z thing. You might not have time to do that. You might see that the right answer is right and just pick what you think is right. But in terms of learning, in terms of the practice tests, in terms of taking practice questions, like that's the learning process. That's the learning part. And to do that, it is really helpful to say, hey, why is this wrong? And especially because a lot of these questions, the same kind of style of mistake, I assume, comes up over and over again, where it's like, oh, I mean, this is a dumb one, but it's like, oh, this would be if you multiplied instead of divided, and you were supposed to divide. And if you did the wrong operation because somehow you got confused, you would get this wrong answer. So I mean, the understanding the patterns in the mistakes that get made that's often a sign of expertise in general, that you understand what mistakes get made often and why people make those mistakes, right? And why those are mistakes.
Yeah, I really like, and I don't know if this is overkill or not, sometimes I feel like it might be, but when people take screenshots of the questions they missed, put them just in an organizer of some sort, and then do that. Deliberately look for patterns. Don't just hope that you notice by reviewing a bunch of questions and then they're just lost into the pool of questions, but pull them out and see if you can find those things that you're commonly doing.
Yeah. I mean, there's like looking for patterns of like your own mistakes, right? Like the things that you tend to do wrong, and then there's also patterns in terms of like the style of questions that are being asked, or the kind of the answer choices that are often distractors, that are common kinds of distractors.
And then I have a few more things to ask about practice questions, but before we get too far from the passages, watching people on YouTube, if you can find people who are hopefully doing the right thing and analyzing how they do it, that seems to me like a good way to kind of learn how is an expert thinking about passages. Would you recommend that as an activity?
Yeah, for sure. I think this is another case where, again, as your experience grows and your expertise grows, kind of how you are training or practicing changes. And so this, in the same way that you might like read before doing some practice problems because you don't have enough knowledge to tackle the practice problems initially, you might watch a couple of these explanation videos, just kind of watch and see like what's the level of explanation and analysis, and what does it look like? What does a good analysis of this look like? And then, I mean, presuming there's enough videos to do this, then you want to move into a place where you look at the passage, you pause the video, you do your own attempt at that, and then you see what the expert or the tutor or whoever like how they broke it down. And then you start seeing the gaps between your understanding and their understanding. That's going to drive your like what sections or what parts that you need to review or study more. So maybe the kinds of problems that you might have to practice more. Initially I would say just watch a couple of these videos if you've never seen someone break it down before. But then after that, I would move as pretty quickly onto like trying to do it yourself, and then seeing what the expert does.
So a bit of a cyclical process. Watch the expert, practice on your own, watch an expert, see what new things you pick up on, practice on your own, and then...
You could, it depends on what the resource base is. Let's say you had, 20 videos or something of this, and, I might watch, 2 or 3 I'm just watching. I've never done this before. I'm just watching, seeing how they break it down, these passages. Okay, now I'm going to preserve like the other 17 to be kind of like expert feedback on these. And I might practice a couple on my own and then practice one that the expert has done to see, hey, they like, is my understanding the same as their understanding? And then it's like, oh, what were the gaps there? I might do that a couple times. Then I might do, practice some ones that, get some independent practice and then come back to the feedback kind of situation. So, I mean, depends on how many you have, depends on lots of things. But yeah.
Back to the questions. One thing, this is again something that I'm unsure of if it's overkill or not. When you're reviewing questions that you've done, I kind of like the idea of don't have the answers revealed and review them without the answers revealed and see if you can figure it out untimed. Maybe even let yourself reference some resources you have, but really try to develop the ability to, with confidence, figure out that right answer. No help from knowing what it is.
Yeah, this is exactly in line with this idea that we mentioned earlier about, the point of taking practice tests is to help you learn the material. And so, I mean, at least that's one of the initial main points. And so, yes, you would, it's better to not see the answer choices present and to be able, like, that gives you a stronger command of the material if you can answer, if you know, like, what the right answer is in the absence of those answer choices. Because often what happens is you look at the answer choices and then that's influencing how you're thinking about the question. And then you're kind of using this process of elimination strategy, or you're using some kind of other thing of like, well, what makes sense or what kinds of things would be reasonable answers here. But you don't want to think about that. You just want to think about, like, what is this question actually asking? And what's the best answer that I have for that question? And actually, I mean, it's really helpful. This is another, I mean, we're seeing all these different ways that you can basically get feedback on your own performance and create feedback even in the absence of having like a one-on-one tutor necessarily. But, if you try to answer the question on your own, then you see the answer choices. Well, what happens when, like, the answer choices look completely different from what you wrote down? Okay, that's a huge signal that tells you, wait, you didn't even understand the question, and so, I think it's a much stronger form of practice when you don't see the answer choices. Now, again, like, I don't want to say that you would never do like a full-on practice, like timed practice to get prepared to take the test. But that happens later on. That happens when you are like, you're already quite confident with the material, and now you're just trying to kind of see what the timing is like, to kind of get some extra cycles in, to kind of see the formatting, the like all the stuff that is kind of the logistical stuff of the test. But that's secondary to actually learning the material. And the main point of the practice tests, I think, and practice questions is to actually learn, help you to learn the material. And then there's some little portion near the end where you're actually like, okay, I'm going to do a full test, today, or I don't know how many days is a MCAT multiple days.
It's one day, and then the timing, it's like 6 hours
okay,
or so.
okay.
I can't remember.
So it's like
math on it,
you might do, you might do a day where you're like, okay, I'm going to do half of it, and then I'm going to do the second half of it later, like a few days later. It's like, okay, how did I do there? Okay, I'm going to try one. Just like you were running a marathon or something, you want to build up your tolerance. You might get really fatigued. If you're running out of time, you might think about, okay, well, where did I spend the most time, and how can I do this more effectively? So, I mean, there are still questions to ask that aren't related to understanding the material. Or are maybe somewhat less related, I guess. But yeah, what we're talking about here is improving your understanding of the material, which I think, is usually benefited from ignoring the answer choices.
Aside from the practice and the skill building for passages, is there anything that people can do to kind of immediately boost their ability to read through a dense passage? I know, like, some people get highlighting, and they think highlighting is going to fix them. Is there anything that's legitimate as a way to possibly immediately kind of help them get through this?
Maybe the disappointing answer to this is I don't think so. The question is a little bit like, is there anything that someone can do to like instantly become a concert pianist? Like, isn't there anything, don't you have any tips to just help someone become a concert pianist like instantly or like within a very short time period? And reading is like that. Reading technical material is like that. It's something that you improve over time. It's something that, to some degree, sometimes students don't even realize that they have a hard time parsing this material until they get to, say, preparing for the MCAT or something. And it's like, oh, wait, oh, wow, I really, like, I get so lost just after one or two sentences, or, I kind of, come up with my own idea and it's not related to what's actually there. So, I mean, I think the way to think about this is, it's a skill that is kind of a long-term skill. Obviously you're going to take the test in a shorter amount of time than you don't have years and years to improve your reading ability. And so, I think this is another case where going slow initially will actually get you, raise your reading level faster than kind of trying some kind of, trick, trying to kind of, speed read these things, or, I highlight all the important words or something. But, one thing that I have recommended for people, and not in the MCAT context, but in other contexts for reading dense passages, is to kind of take at the end of each sentence, just say, or clause even, if it's just a long sentence, just at the end, these 5 words, what does this mean? Do I know what this means? At the end of a sentence, hey, can I just say what this is about really quickly? And it could be as simple as like, 3 or 4 words that you say. It could be an image that you draw, that you read a sentence and like, okay, it's actually faster and easier for you to understand, an image representation of what the sentence is saying. And it's going to be really painful at first to do that because it feels like you're going so slow and everything has to be parsed out. But as you continue to do that, and as you continue to solve problems, like you won't have to go into that level of detail all the time, and you won't have to stop at every single sentence. But you'll start to kind of, or you want to aim to kind of be having a more of a flow. And one of the videos I released not too long ago, I talk about like translating, these sentences. I mean, that was using a philosophy text, but to some degree, you could apply those ideas in the MCAT context as well. So, if, there's a certain named chemical, okay, well, what's that chemical compound? Or what's the molecular formula for that? Okay, there's some process that's going on, that they're like, okay, well, what is that process? So it's, if someone mentions the Krebs cycle or something, it's like, can you, quickly jot that down? I mean, this is helping you remember some of this stuff as well. But if you can, translate each sentence, again, this is going to be slow going, this is going to be painful, but as you get experience doing that, then it'll become easier and easier to do. Another thing you might want to try is just to kind of look kind of quickly. I mean, read through it. Always read through it. But then when you do, like maybe you read through it once, and then when you read through it the second time, you could. I mean, I feel comfortable saying like, okay, you could highlight certain things or underline certain things. Like now, what are the most important parts? But I think it's important to read through the passage once to understand, at least begin to understand what's being said, and then to try to highlight these parts that, seem important, at least to you at this time. And maybe as you become more expert, you would have a different view, but at least at this time seem important to you. And then like, okay, then now that you've identified the important parts, now expand on each of those important parts. Like, what do you know about each one of these things? And then So now you've kind of, you've tried to get an overall sense of things. You've, tried to pick out the important parts. Now you've expanded. You've kind of built off of those parts with your knowledge of it. Now, can you state as a whole again? Come back to this situation model of what's happening here. Like, can you explain what is happening here? None of these are all kind of, they're not like, get rich quick scheme kind of scenarios. These are things that, like, they basically are there to help you develop the skill of reading. And it's something that it takes time, and maybe for some students this might be the most important skill to work on to do well in the MCAT. For other students it might be some other part of the test, but it's really it's a good skill, and especially if you're going to be a doctor as well, and like reading research papers and stuff like this, like it's not bad to be able to do this.
Yeah, I get the sense sometimes with online advice that some people who've done well in the test don't realize there is a variation in terms of how well people read passages, and they're like, oh, you don't need to read the passage, or you don't need to review every passage, just the questions you got wrong. And I think it's the fact that they have not seen people who don't read the passages as well as they walked into the test able to do. And they don't understand that this is a skill that if you don't have it, you don't just magically walk into the test able to do it. You got to build it up.
I mean, that's been something that I think has been hard for me to understand when I've been talking to other people about reading and reading skills over the past maybe year or so. And it's like, I don't know sometimes what people are doing when they say they're reading and I'm reading and we're trying to read the same thing, and I have no idea what's going on in their head, and I think reading skills are, like, the gaps in reading skills are sometimes covered up by the educational system and by, like, doing, like, people manage to get by through not really understanding what they're reading sometimes. And it's just, and you don't even know that there's a whole world out there that someone else has been getting practice on for ages, for years, and you don't know because you've actually never really experienced that, and no one has caught on yet that you're doing something a little bit different. So yeah, I mean, I think reading skills are really important and kind of, more varied than I would have thought, and it takes some time for sure.
One thing that I tell my students to do that sounds fairly similar to what you're saying is when they're reading through stuff and it starts to mention things that they know about from content. Let's say, for instance, it makes a claim that, I'm just making this up, that calcium is used to pull the phosphate out of solution. I think the tendency for a lot of people is to just read over that, and they just read over it, and there's not a lot of thinking with that. But what they can do is think calcium is positively charged. I know phosphate is negatively charged. Maybe they come together. That's how the calcium pulls it out. And then once they do that for that sentence, the next 2, 3, 4, the whole passage sometimes is easier to understand because that one sentence was really what so much else is going to be about. And it just it takes the sentence and packages it into a very simple concept that makes a lot of sense that then the rest of the sentences build on.
This just goes back to what we were talking about at the very beginning with reading skills in general and what reading is and isn't and what it can help you do. And this is like part of the sense-making process is, okay, they made the statement. How does that actually work? How would that make sense based on what I already know about calcium and phosphate? And this, and it happens in different ways and different subjects and everything, but when you read, you're not just accepting what you're being given, right? It's like you and the book or you and the passage are growing together, and you're filling in gaps, you're reasoning through things, you're being critical, but you're also you're imagining possibilities, you're imagining examples, you're imagining connections, mechanisms, processes, all these kinds of things that would help make sense of what you're reading. and this is the part that I think sometimes people, when they read, they think they're just like looking for information, like you're doing a Google search or something, or a keyword search. I'm just like looking for keywords, or I'm just like reading the words that are there, and I'm not thinking, I'm not imagining, I'm not like in their world. I mean, there's a lot of other like kind of more generic advice that I have heard that I think is good advice about, when people read research studies and in psychology, for instance. One of the good pieces of advice that I heard from someone in grad school was like, imagine you are the person in this research study. What happens first to you? What happens next to you? Like how does everything proceed? How do you feel even, during this part of the process? Like, what do you think you're doing during this thing? So like in the same way, like you kind of want to be wrapped up in the world. I know it's probably, MCAT material is pretty dry. It's not like, we're on an adventure, blah, blah, blah.
I love it. I think it's so interesting.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, you want to be there with them and kind of be imagining what's happening. And to the degree that a lot of these things have substance and relevance, I think for a lot of people the material seems distant because it's like it's a bunch of chemical formulas. There's all these kinds of rules that I'm supposed to follow. Doesn't quite make sense to me or whatever. But you just want to be so close up to them to kind of see, like this is phosphate, this is something, and these are the qualities of it, and this is how, it's friendly with other things, it's not friendly with other things, like, yeah, to be up close like that, I think is really important.
Yeah, and I think that's why I love thinking about real life so much, because it just brings it to where it's not just a textbook. This stuff is real. This is how the world works. And you can actually understand how so much stuff works if you try and treat it like that.
Yeah, for sure.
Any advice specifically for data interpretation? That's one thing that people really struggle with.
So this, you mean like interpreting graphs, like scientific graphs, or
Yeah.
like certain kinds of images, scientific images, that kind of thing?
Probably not images, graphs, figures. Yeah, graphs, and then, sorry, figures sounds like images. Let's just say graphs and like tables,
Okay.
numerical data for the most part.
Yeah. This is another, one of the reasons, I mean, we didn't really talk about this before, but one of the reasons why you test yourself often, whether this is with free recall, with teaching it to someone, with, especially with practice problems, the most important kind of testing in this scenario, the important part is that you find your weaknesses and address them. And so, hey, it's good. Okay, if you find you really struggle with data interpretation, that's fantastic. Knowing what you are weak at is like the major step in solving the problem. And so similar to what we were saying earlier about like reading passages, where it's like, okay, if you have trouble reading passages, you want to get high quality practice in, it would be great to get some feedback about, your analysis, and you want to focus on this, maybe even, put off answering questions for a little while, just focus on, have you interpreted the passages correctly? And I think the same basic advice applies here, where, okay, we want to get more practice on interpreting these graphs and tables and various other kinds of scientific figures. And so, how are we going to get practice at that is the big question. And you might ignore the passage. Just look at the graph and see what you can glean from the graph before doing anything else. And again, if there are videos, or if there's written material about this, like, hey, and maybe even this, maybe there's stuff that is unrelated to the MCAT but is out there online that could be a good resource for people of reading some of these complex graphs. What are the kinds of axes that are common? What are the kinds of, certain types of graphs have certain qualities? And maybe this is a lack of, maybe some students, they don't have a strong statistical background or something, or they're, there's just the data analysis in general might be under taught at the undergraduate level. And so this is something maybe that the MCAT is expecting, but you just, no one taught you this thing. You weren't expected to interpret these graphs. And so, if you can get that expert feedback, that'd be good. A couple of one technique that comes to mind is when you look at a graph, pick a point that seems interesting. It doesn't really matter what it is. And try to figure out what that point means, or what that bar means, or what that number means if it's in the table. Whatever it is, just pick one thing and be like, okay, that says 5.2. What does that 5.2 represent? And to do that, you kind of have to walk through the figure, okay, wait, this is the label for the columns, but then it's in this like subsection of columns, and these are rows, and then they have like another subsection of rows here. This 5.2 is, it says X, Y, and Z thing. Okay, I understand that. Now pick another point and do it again. And as you kind of follow the trail, then you should be able to get a kind of larger picture of what's going on. And then you always want to, I don't know. Again, I'm coming from a social science background, so I think this is correct, but feel free to jump in. But in my view, you always want to get a sense of what's the point of this graph. And sometimes there could be many points, like graphs can be incredibly dense. So you could draw out, 6, 7 really critical things that are important about this, or surprising, or that illustrate something. So when you are reading this kind of thing, within the context of a passage or a question, maybe it's only 1 or 2 of those things that happen to be important. But if you start, with interpreting one point or one little bit of information first, and then you can kind of this goes back to the zooming out again. You can zoom back out and be like, okay, so given that I've done this like for 3 or 4 points, I think I'm getting a sense of what the pattern is here. Now what's the point of this graph? What is it actually showing? And in a way, this is it's just another variety of reading skill, in my view. Like it's using different symbols, and a different kind of language and vocabulary, but essentially this is just another reading skill that you have to get good at. And again, this is also another reading skill. I know students want to do well on the MCAT, but it's like, if you're going to be a doctor, please learn how to read graphs well and quickly and competently, because I want you to know what the hell you're talking about. Or a pharmacist, or who, many of these things, it's this is a long-term skill that hopefully you would be continuing to develop even after you take the MCAT.
Yeah, one thing that I tell them that I think has been fairly useful is kind of starting with what you said, pick a point, pick another point where only one variable changed, and see what happened. And I think, I feel like that's a kind of what you should always do. And you always just to associate this change is because of this variable. And then you just knock out one variable at a time. And then gradually that picture becomes clear. And then the other thing that I love having them do is read the experimental design. A lot of these passages tell you how the design was set up. And either with the data or before you even look at the data, predict what the data is going to look like. What are they looking for? What's the relationship? What's the question they're asking? Why does the design answer the question? Trying to just predict, relate it, again, drawing relationships and going piece by piece.
Yeah, I think in our conversation here, we've had, I don't know how many times that we've talked about creating contrasts for yourself when there isn't necessarily an expert around to tell you what you did wrong. So it's like here, if you read the study design and you predict what the graph would look like, before you look at the graph, cover up the graph, make sure you don't look at it first. Then you get to see this contrast. Hey, here's what the graph actually looked like. Here was your picture. How different is it? And where did you go wrong? And like surface, so much of this studying and learning is about surfacing your weaknesses, surfacing your misunderstandings and your mistakes and addressing them. And so the more that we can surface those, and what you just said before, pick 2 points that differ only by one thing. What's the difference? Again, this is a contrast kind of thing that like you're pushing off of kind of 2 things to help you learn a 3rd thing in a way. Yeah, I think both of those are, that's really, those are both really good techniques for sure.
Final question around practice questions. Is there any value, or you have already said there's value, but specifically asking about this shock effect when we do questions over topics that we have no exposure to? Is there any value in doing that, and does it enhance that long-term memorization of it?
So there is a surprising finding, or I don't know. It depends on what you think beforehand, whether you think it's surprising. But of when you answer a question and you're very confident about the answer, and you are very wrong about the answer, that actually people tend to remember the correct answer better. It's almost like an emotional experience of like, you were so confident, and then you realize, if you get to the point where you actually realize you're wrong, people have various ways of protecting their ego where they don't realize they're wrong. But if you get to the point where you realize you're wrong, and it's very apparent, then your memory for that that kind of question and that answer is stronger in general than if you have less confidence in your answer. So if you look at the situation that we're talking about, there are other relevant findings, but if you look at the situation where it's like, okay, I have no prior experience with this, I'm going to tackle these questions. How likely am I to be shocked by my answer? Like, the shock level is if you're very confident and you thought it worked one way and then it works in a completely different way. So I think like that, it's hard to engineer that kind of scenario, right? Because a lot of times I think if you were to answer it, like if you were to just ask me, knowing so little about the MCAT and many of the subjects on the test, if you were to just give me a bunch of questions, I would just be like, I don't really know what the answer is. Like, maybe this makes some sense. And then you would show me the right one. I'd be like, oh yeah, I guess, I figured I was wrong. So yeah, that makes more sense. So I don't know that is terribly valuable. And just the mere fact of being surprised is not like, it's not necessarily terribly valuable. I do think seeing that contrast, like what we were talking about earlier, between like your answer and the correct answer is important for seeing, but not really necessarily because I'm just like, what? That, but more so seeing like, hey, this is where, like seeing in more detail where you went wrong and what your misunderstanding actually is, and allowing you to read kind of read that expert answer and understand that concept better than you understood it before. So yeah, I think, again, like I had mentioned earlier, I think if you can make progress on a problem, meaningful progress, even if you can't fully get the answer, even if you can just set up the answer, or analyze a passage decently well, even if you can't answer the questions right away. I think it can make sense to start tackling practice problems even that early in the process. But yeah, if you're just randomly answering, I don't think it's helpful, and I wouldn't necessarily say that like pursuing shock or surprise just for the sake of it is that helpful. Yeah,
just has to kind of happen accidentally, and then it's going to be helpful if
I think it's just the kind of thing that's hard to engineer, how confident you will be in the answer, unless you're the kind of person that's just like super confident in every answer. I don't know. But
okay, well, that is all the questions that I have, and just wanted to see if you had any kind of wrap up ideas on if there's any like big takeaways based on what you've heard about how people prep for the MCAT and what you know. anything that you would want them to take away if they listen to this whole thing, what's the most important aspects that they should walk away with?
Really focus on practice questions. Do them early and often. Allow your mistakes to help shape your future studying trajectory. We didn't talk about this much, but it seems like for a lot of standardized tests, people have like a set schedule that they're going to follow, and that I'm going to do this section here, that section there, that section there. And you really, I mean, like a cliche or something, it's like, everyone has their own journey. But it's like there are patterns, like say people have trouble doing data interpretation, or interpreting these scientific figures. It's like, okay, a lot of people have that problem. But it's important to surface the problems that you have and target those problems, and the productivity of the studying process is vitally tied to that diagnostic part of it, which answering the question, trying to answer the questions early on, that's what helps you diagnose where your misunderstandings are. And so, yeah, the earlier you can start doing that, and incorporating that with your reading, interlacing the two together, I think is just, I just think you're going to be way better off in the long run, for sure.
Okay, well, thank you very much for taking the time to answer all these questions. I found it very interesting, a lot of things that I learned from it, and I hope that enough people watching it, these ideas can really start to leak into the MCAT space and hopefully kind of steer the ship a little bit more towards, mostly, sounds like just practice questions would be the simplest way for people to really start boosting their MCAT prep. But thank you very much for taking the time out to answer all those questions.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me. It's been a great time.